Hey everyone, welcome back to the Pastor Dad podcast where we talk about faith, family, culture, and truth. This one I think is going to be touch on all of those, all in one video. It's a video that I had not originally planned to make. It wasn't on my radar, and just responding or looking at reacting to some of the news that came out. That's one of the things that I want to do here is just off the cuff respond to things that are happening. And so if you recognize the gentleman to the left of the screen, then you probably know where I'm going with this one. The gentleman is a beloved author in Christian circles and probably even outside of Christian circles. He's been, I imagine he's known, at least to some degree. Just been a prolific author, 30 books, 17 million copies, and his name is Philip Yancey. What the occasion that brings him to the limelight is his recent resignation from Christianity Today and from all writing and things like that. And so, if you, like I said, if you recognize Philip Yancey by looking at him, you probably know where I'm going with this. Recently, he sent an email to a place where he was an editor and has been a writer and for a number of years. I don't know how long. But Philip Yancey confessed to an affair, and as happens quite a bit in Christian ministry circles, when that happens, it's sort of there's an understanding that maybe I shouldn't be writing and leading people and sort of telling people how they should live their lives and things if mine's so off course. And so that's what brings me to make this video. And I actually had recorded it a couple times. And yet I didn't when I had recorded it, I wasn't sure that my spirit was sort of in the right place, that I was doing it with the right motivation. And so I wanted to take a minute and think about it, decompress from finding out the news about it, and then maybe come back and try again with a little bit more grace than maybe I had at first. Now, it may not seem that way because I don't intend to depart from really the way I had responded to it in the first place. And that was not with a whole lot of grace. And because the fact of the matter is, Philip Yancey is yet another in a long and seemingly endless line of prolific Christian authors, leaders, pastors, teachers, writers, that have this. This is the way they exit ministry. In a sense, they don't end well, and I'm frankly getting sick and tired of it. I really am. It's not that any of us is perfect. None of us are perfect, and that's why we all need grace, and that's why we are always encouraging others to share and show grace to another when they fall into sin. They fall into a situation where they are not living up to the ideals that they write about or they talk about, and so it's understandable that happens. We will all I'll mess up today before the day is over, for sure, if I haven't already, and so I say that understanding that and wanting to start from a place of self-reflection rather than judgment. And yet, I think, for a world that's watching, for a world that's, got the Christian world under a microscope, and oftentimes it feels as though the world is just waiting for Christians to mess up so they can point their finger and say, see, you're not that good. Now, the easy and sort of automatic response is that from the Christian should be, well, of course I'm not. Yeah. I'm not perfect, and as the bumper sticker says, I'm not perfect. I'm just forgiven, and that's a clever way of sort of just admitting that we're imperfect. We're all going to be hypocrites at times, hopefully not intentionally, hopefully not as a pattern of lifestyle, but we all will be. We're all going to be hypocritical at points in our lives, and that's not limited to Christians. So any of my atheist friends that might be watching or listening to this, so are you. I mean, this is not debatable. You profess ideals you don't live up to. That is by definition, that is hypocrisy. Especially if you're preaching that to other people, then you are by definition hypocritical. We none of us escapes that. None of us can get away from that happening on occasion in our lives. That's why it's important to confess our sins. It's important to repent of them and be in a continual mode of doing that, so that and it humbles you, right? I mean, it humbles you to be constantly self-reflecting and confessing the things that we're struggling with, so that it tells us that we're not perfect. It reminds us that we're not perfect. It tells the watching world that we know that we're not perfect, right? And but this one kind of hit me different. And I suppose Philip Yancey is the victim of just having been the straw that broke the camel's back, so to speak. Because I've seen so many of these. I've seen so many of these. I imagine at this point, it almost seems like to a world that is looking, on Christians as like we're in a fishbowl, and it's like they're just waiting for the inevitability for anybody that says X to do Y, for anybody that says do not do this for them to do that. And yet I preach from week to week. I teach about how there is a life lived, by the Spirit of God, by the grace of God and the power of God, is lived free of having to engage in these things as a pattern of life. And I suppose that's what brings me to such a pronounced opinion about this particular iteration of Christian leaders falling. And that is that Philip Yancey confesses not just to an affair, but he confesses to an affair that lasted over 8 years. Now, folks, we're no longer talking about I fell into a hole. I can chide somebody if they, if somebody, they take a path home from work every day and they walk home and this path, they find themselves, they fell into a pit, or they twisted their ankle in a rut that's there, right? You can kind of be forgiving, and obviously forgiveness is not meant to have a limit, right? I mean, so we understand as a Christian principle to not put a cap on our forgiveness, but I mean this just in a sense that you can understand. You can understand the person that walks down that path a couple times and twists their ankle both times. But when you see them walking down that path 3, 4, 5, 6 times, and each time they fall into the same rut or they twist their ankle in the same rut every time, you start to say it's not the fault of the rut, it's the fault of the person who doesn't change course. Is there another way you can go? Or can you open your eyes a bit wider while you're walking so that you don't fall into that same rut each and every time? And I look at something like this, and it's particularly and profoundly disappointing, because this is a case of just that. Not 3 or 4 or 5 times. We're talking about 8 years. We're talking about 8 Mother's Days, 8 anniversaries, 8 Christmases, 8 Easters, 8 cycles of the calendar. And this man, and his wife have been married for 55 years. And so in the last 8 years of them, I think that's what I think he said 8 years was like, to this point. So it wasn't 8 years, a slice of time in his marriage before. I think it was 8 years prior to the moment now. And so he's confessing this affair, withdraws from ministry. He says the writer said he will retire from speaking and writing. He's going to retire from speaking and writing and grieves the devastation I have caused. I don't doubt that that's true. I don't doubt that he grieves the devastation and recognizes, of course, the devastation that he's caused. My question is, how were you capable of doing this for 8 years without understanding and grieving the devastation all the while? This is a man who has written books, like I said, mostly about grace and suffering and things like that. But I know he's also written on topics such as the biblical sexual ethic. Like how do you? I just wonder how do you come to your laptop every morning knowing that you have an ongoing affair and dare to pen any words? Now, for the sake of transparency and for the sake of integrity here, I don't know, and I'm not gonna do a bunch of research for this. You can blast me in the comments if you know of anything. But I don't know that he's written anything specifically on this issue. I know that he wrote something, just towards the beginning of what would be, or just prior to this affair starting, if the timeline all lines up, about biblical sexual ethics. And maybe this is something that there's a weird Freudian sort of concept where people want to start talking about things that they're and I don't know psychology, so correct me on this one too. But that people start talking about, writing about, almost obsessing about things that they're engaged in. And so if you find a person who just they can't help but just write about sex all the time, it might indicate sort of an obsession with that, and maybe they're dealing with something where that's the expression of that obsession is coming out in paper on paper. But I have no idea because I don't know how prolific he was at writing on that topic. I don't know that he's certainly not known for that. And like I said, I have not read any of his books. I've probably read a couple of his articles over the years, but I wouldn't know which ones and couldn't speak to any of them. I just was really thrown by the length of time, the 8 years, grieving the devastation I have caused. Literally, living a life, a pattern of life. That's the thing, is right. You can understand when somebody falls into a pit, and maybe they do it twice and even 3 times, but when they're living it out, when a person is living it out, it ceases to become an oops. It's no longer an oops. The oops is on us. At some point, like, we're still reading this guy, and he had us all fooled this whole time. And but it's no longer an oops on his part. It's a willful, and he uses that word. I think somewhere he uses the word willful, affair that he entered into, and this with a married woman. Now, I want to issue this caveat, because I think this is important. I think it's important, and oftentimes this is where I start. I take a moment like this and I say self-reflection time. I'm not perfect. I have temptations. I've been guilty of things that I'm not proud of, and so always start with grace. Always start with perspective, and always start with self sort of a reflection. I think that's helpful, and that's why I normally start. And so I don't leave that out altogether with this one, but it's different, I think, because of the 8 years, and continuing on the entire time that you're continuing on in this affair the entire time. Now, that's right. I wanted to offer the caveat. So part of my self-reflection is to think, okay, what temptations, what variables are at play here in this situation that I don't contend with, right? I don't contend with fame or fortune. I'm not regularly I'm not a sought after speaker. I'm not a popular author. I travel in small circles, have a relatively very, very small influence, and so this is an admission that I don't know what it's like to have a temptation of somebody, maybe a woman, throwing herself at you, or even being in an environment where that might be more likely. I have no idea how this happened, but I want to suggest that it's not inevitable. Whatever the temptations that Philip encountered that many of us do not, the giving into the sin is not inevitable. Now, if you dwell on it, I've said this before, if you dwell on a sin and like you have the devil on one shoulder and an angel on the other, kind of cartoonish way of understanding it. What I have said from the pulpit a number of times is, like, if you entertain the idea of a sin and sort of debate in your mind whether or not you're going to do it, eventually you will. So don't, as soon as you are entertaining the idea, cast it out of your mind, get it out of your head, because eventually, if you don't, eventually you will give into it. You're not strong enough to just sit and fight. So I don't know. I don't know how much temptation he was under, and I don't know how this relationship started. Was it somebody with they're already friends or colleagues and they got too cozy, whatever? But what I will say is that the defense for this looks the same for all of us, and that is to build higher fences. And so I remember a story years ago. I and I don't know if this was meant to be flirtatious. I mean, it seems to have been, but I had a colleague years ago say something to me about, it's a shame that you're married. And I was a new employee, and I guess it would have been like a fresh meat situation, but like, and in that moment, I was like, I didn't know what to say. I it was a throwaway comment. It was said quickly, off the cuff. It was probably meant to be some sort of flattering, flirty move. And I thought, man, as fast as I wanted my mind to work, and it wasn't working as quickly as I wanted it to. Um, I thank the Lord that it did work fast enough for me to say, well, I love being married. And it made the situation incredibly awkward. And I suppose I could have handled it in a more like, um, I could have handled it in a more, meeting her tone sort of way. Like she was probably just, joking around, casually flirting, whatever. But in my response, I did kind of catch or sense a need to sort of end it, not invite another iteration, not another phase of it. So I knew by saying what I was about to say, even though I had to come up with it quickly, um, you know, I, I knew that it was not going to invite a further iteration of that. And thankfully I've not been, I mean, I've not been under that sort of pressure or that sort of like, um, the sort of pressure and temptation that somebody who's a sought after speaker and writer probably is under much more of the time. But again, I think the fix is the same for all of us. Is that is to respond to each moment, respond in each moment with the right answer. That way, those little micro decisions that somehow, and you don't even know how it happened, somehow turn into, I'm sharing a bed with somebody who isn't my wife, and I'm not her husband. In this situation, it was a married woman, and so it was like two households like wrecking each other. And so I say this as sort of a cautionary tale to anybody that finds themselves in a situation where they might be tempted to cheat on their spouse. Like, look, it's usually not it's not a one step thing. When you're unfaithful to your spouse, it is usually the result of you've made bad decision after bad decision after bad decision. It compounds, and then you find yourself in a breach of your marital vows. Now, those are little breaches for sure. Those little cracks and fissures that you're allowing, those need to be repaired too and walked back. But one rarely finds themselves like in a situation where one decision lands them in the bed of somebody who they're not married to. And So, cautionary tale for anybody. Now, there is a bright spot in this story. I'll get to in a moment, but I want to talk about just sort of the devastation that this particular one caused and is going to cause. Now, very sad for Philip Yancey. A couple years ago, 2023, he was diagnosed with Parkinson's, and so that is it can be a devastating disease. It usually is a devastating disease, and we've seen some famous people have to contend with it, and it's heartbreaking to watch it steal the mobility, steal the control, steal the humanity away from the person who has it. And I know and care about some people that over the years and currently that are wrestling with Parkinson's. Now he was diagnosed a couple years ago, and his wife was designated to be his caregiver when he'll need that. He seems to be doing okay with it right now, and so praise God for that. But here he is admitting this thing to his wife, that the last 8 years of our marriage have been basically a sham. They've basically been a fraud. And by the way, I'm going to retire from ministry and writing, and now I need you to care for me. And I think about his dear wife and how devastating, how traumatic that is for her. Now, in the last 8 healthy years of their marriage, he chose to dishonor his marriage and his vows, And now that his body is going to start breaking down, he confesses this betrayal, and will now need somebody to care for him. Now, I don't think it probably, that was sort of opportunism was in his mind when he decided his timing. I've had my fun. Now that I'm breaking down, I'll go ahead. I think the Lord worked on his heart, and he was truly grieved. I'm amazed that it took 8 years. I mean, it's unconscionable, that it would take 8 years for you to reckon with that, and to come clean. All the while you're taking money from churches and people that buy your books and things. And now you need your wife's help. And that's another thing I was thinking about. He's going to retire. When you say you're going to retire from something, it's like, it doesn't need to be a negative reason that caused you to retire. And so I don't even like the language of him retiring. Like, oh, now that I've had my fun, I've made my millions or hundreds of thousands for sure. Living a cozy life. Now I'll retire. He's wiped his social media presence and will just sort of fade off into the sunset. Now, I don't want to make light of the fact that the cost of that is still great, because those of us that are in Christian ministry, one of the things that fuel our ministries is that we want to hear, well done, good and faithful servant. Those are the words that we long to hear, that we finished well. Not just that we started well, but we finished well. And while he certainly did a lot of good, it will always come with an asterisk. It'll always come with sort of a footnote that, yeah, you did well for 50 years, but then those last 8, man, you really messed up. And I think that's going to be his legacy now. It'll never not be connected to what he did in the twilight of it. And so it's, again, I come back to the idea that a watching world is saying to people like me, the little guys who are just trying to lead a church, a small church in a small town, and trying to convince people that this Christian life is possible to be lived faithfully, by which our marriages are like pictures of faithfulness. It's a great metaphor for faithfulness to Christ is faithfulness to your marriage. And it doesn't mean there's not hope beyond that. And I talk to and minister to and pray with people who have been on the receiving and giving end of that. There is forgiveness and grace beyond those things, but it doesn't come without scars and damage, and so part of that damage is the damage of the witness of the church. Now, Jesus hasn't failed anybody because Philip Yancey did. But what happens is that becomes a reflection of the church at large. And so people that are just tallying up, how many people have been guilty of this, this is just another notch, another count. And that'll be all that they need to conclude exactly what they already concluded about the church, that we're a fraud. And that's one of the reasons it's important not to point people to ourselves, but to point people to Jesus, because we say, hey, don't look at me. Look at Jesus. He's the author. He's the finisher of our faith. He's the person. And Paul said, follow me as I follow Christ. Of course, the obvious caveat is if I stop following Christ, you stop following me. It should be obvious. But again, to a world that is looking for gotcha moments, this is certainly one of them. Now, I want to take a minute to just... this is one of the articles that I actually found. Most of them have been like all about, grace and mercy, and we gotta treat him the same way we want to be treated if we got caught up in this. Certainly, we would hope that people would show us grace, but judgment has got to begin. Now, let me get to that one first. So 1 Peter 4, judgment begins in the household of God. We can't expect for people to take us seriously if we're not taking our own sins seriously. If we're pointing the finger at all the ones that we're not guilty of, and then we can't point the finger back at ourselves at the ones that we are guilty of. And so it's when we see something like this, we need to respond with kindness and love. But love, I often say this, true love is not a pampering love, but a perfecting love. True love doesn't leave somebody in the throes of sin and wrongdoing, but would rather seek to pull that person out of it in love. Not to say, you should be better and to feel like you're a better Christian than they are. No, if that's what's motivating you, then you need to confess of that. But true love is not a pampering love, but a perfecting love. And so I found this article, and this is from the Christian Post, but I liked the transition here, talking about forgiveness first, but then they said, and I think it's important, yet forgiveness does not erase consequences. Forgiveness does not erase consequences. 8 years of willful disobedience have left deep wounds, and Philip's human legacy now carries a shadow that was not there before. He has not, in the eyes of many, finished well. Exactly as what I said a moment ago was like our goal is to finish well. That reality grieves me not because I stand in judgment, because I know how fiercely Philip himself longed to finish well. And I believe that. I believe that he did long to finish well, and how earnestly he wrote about the danger of drifting from grace. And that's it. Even after receiving grace, sometimes we can use grace as an opportunity. Well, if I'm under grace, then I can just keep sinning, doing whatever I want. Like we were just in a passage in Romans that talked about, should I continue to sin that grace might abound? And Paul answers his own question. He says, of course not. But rather grace ought to result in righteousness. That grace ought to not be taken for granted, but rather turned into something, a desire to continue living worthy of the grace that we've been shown. And so we understand that we're all susceptible to it. We're all guilty. We're all we're all imperfect and these things. But I think it's important to understand just how devastating this is, not just his own relationship, but how devastating it is to the cause of Christ. Because people will look at this, and somebody somewhere, maybe many somebodies, many places, will use this as the reason they say, you know what, I'm not listening anymore. I've seen enough. You guys are all hypocrites, and here's exhibit A, B, C, D, whatever letter we're on, and that's all we need to know. So, I had something else I was going to share. Got some words from her. I thought I had some of her own words. Janet, his wife. But if I can't find them, I won't waste a lot of time. Here it says Janet has extended forgiveness. Someone somewhere quoted, I don't know if it's in this article or not. Yeah, I don't. It may not be in this article, but she speaks of coming from a place of trauma and real betrayal, and yet she is seeking to honor her vows that she made. The covenant that she entered into with her husband was one that she took as a sacred vow. She's not going to back out easily, even though she has been devastated. So I want to end on that note. Janet here is the real hero for showing forgiveness and grace in the face of absolute and utter betrayal, and a betrayal that lasted all those years. And I just pray that God will give her a special blessing for her response to this. One of the clear, and some would argue the only justification for divorce is infidelity. And so Janet has a clear and biblical case that she could walk away from this. She could walk away from any obligation to be the caregiver to her husband as he becomes more and more increasingly in need of that. And rather, she's choosing to stick it out, to love him, who has been fairly unlovable with this coming to light, and to show him the grace and mercy that he wrote about all these years. And she's going to live out now his words. And to his credit, he says, he's kind of, I've been hard on him, but he's vanished from social media. He says, I betrayed the very words I've written, and so now in my whatever years I have left, I want to try to live up to the words I've already written rather than writing more of them. And so God bless her and her forgiveness and her grace that she's showing to her husband. God bless him and his true repentance of this, and I hope it wasn't just because he was caught. I don't know the circumstances there. But you know what God does? And here's the amazing thing is God takes stuff like this, ugly stuff like this. God takes and redeems situations like this, as bad as they are, and uses them for his glory. And I think what that's going to look like is perhaps, Janet having a profound impact, perhaps on the audience that once hung on every word that her husband wrote, and now is seeing that grace and that mercy demonstrated by his much lesser known wife than there ever was, perhaps in his writing. So God bless them as they both strive to finish well, even in the wake of this devastating reality. But let it be a lesson to us, especially the men that are maybe watching this episode. Men, you've got to. We are called to live a certain way. You are expected to stand firm in it. We do say, I don't stand because of my own strength, but because of the grace of God. But with that grace, there is an expectation that you actually stand. And God won't do the standing for you. You have to do that. We couldn't do it without his grace, but we are expected to do it with his grace. And so with that, I will leave you until the next one. God bless.